that our bandwidth is being cut down so that we don't have enough bandwidth to cover broadcasting to both. I don't know. That would be kind of ridiculous if they did that.
The commentary I'm looking at right now, I didn't realize Rash was the grandson of Rashi. You mean that literally?
I think so. Okay, there we go. Okay. This is what it is. So, where do you want to look today?
We start from the beginning.
Sure. Go ahead.
This is not the most interesting for a different reason than last week's, not very interesting. But the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them," this has there's a whole bunch of commentaries on why suddenly God is calling to Moses first.
So this is Leviticus 1, by the way. If you're wondering where we are, Leviticus 1. I'll tip that down just a little bit. Okay.
So they're making, all the commentaries are making the point about God calling to Moses, because every place else it's just God said to Moses. When any of you presents an offering of cattle to the Lord, he shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock. The offering is a burnt offering from the herd. He shall make his offering a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in his behalf before the Lord. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable on his behalf, an expiation for him. Does the Hebrew, is it all hymns, or is that just problem of English?
Let's see. I was look up here a lot, yeah, on his behalf. Yeah, it's all for him.
So are women allowed to bring sacrifices?
No, I think the women are included there. It's the problem of they didn't use a singular neutral.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Now, it could be that a woman brought it to somebody else who brought it further in because they're visual purity issues. But I don't know.
The bull shall be slaughtered before the Eternal, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar, which is in the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed up and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire on the altar and lay out wood upon the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall lay out the sections with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. Its entrails and legs shall be washed with water, and the priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Eternal.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting when you talk about how this stuff was done. Like, for example, it says that the offering may be acceptable on his behalf. So this text says that what we're talking about here, the sacrifice counts in the favor of the person who makes the offering, even if it's performed by somebody else. When a sacrifice isn't considered a proper offering, it's said that it's not acceptable. We also have Lifnei Adonai here, making a sacrifice Lifnei Adonai, before Adonai. My Oxford commentary here, or this is the JPS commentary, excuse me, says that this seems to delineate a defined sacred area, at times the area beginning in the rear of the altar and continuing to the interior tent. In other passages, it's less specific, referring to a large space near the entrance of the courtyard. The point is that priestly law strictly limits sacrifice to a particular area and to the legitimate altar, meaning, according to this text, we're dealing with that you can only make sacrifices in that specific area. That may have been applied to limit you from making sacrifices in other shrines at some point. But yeah, I think it probably was an understanding that the area when you came into the inner courtyard where the altar was all the way until the inner shrine, and that probably applied where there were other shrines, when the other shrines were operating too. Like there was a separate level of holiness when you came closer. And I think that's what we're dealing with. And I think also this has to do with specifically making an offering to Adonai as opposed to just bringing a donation to the temple. Like Lifnei Adonai, I think, has to do with designating it as an offering to Adonai.
Yeah, because this is the burnt offering, so it's the whole the whole animal, most of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're just cutting up the animal, so you're cutting it up and using it in sections. But
so this would, I mean, also the models of the second temple, right? They have the women's area, which is probably if a woman brought an offering where she would then give it to a priest. And you've got the men's area, then you've got the priests, the Levites, the priests, and then you've got the sacrificial area where only the most holy people go. Right?
Yeah. And so now we're in Leviticus 1:10. Let's see here. Yeah, we're in Leviticus 1:10. If his offering for a burnt offering is from the flock of the sheep or goats, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. It shall be slaughtered before Adonai on the north side of the altar. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. When it has been cut up into sections, the priest shall lay them out with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. The entrails and the legs shall be washed with water. And and then you turn the whole thing into smoke on the altar. It's a burnt offering, an offering by fire.
This is basically a
pleasing odor to the Lord. Yeah, I mean, that's what it is, and it's describing exactly how you should do it. If the offering of the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, he shall choose his offering from turtle doves or pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar, pinch off its head, and turn it into smoke on the altar. Lovely. And its blood shall be drained out against the side of the altar. He shall remove the crop with its contents and cast it into the place of the ashes at the east side of the altar. The priest shall tear it open by its wings without severing it, and turn it into smoke on the altar. Upon the wood that is on the fire, it is a burnt offering, an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to Adonai. So the main thing to understand here is these are largely dependent both on what kind of sacrifice you had to offer and how much money you had. If you were somebody who was a wealthier person, then you would have a bigger animal. And if you were only able to afford, a little bird that you were able to catch, then that's what you offered. Otherwise, these are all edible animals. That's the other thing to understand. You're not offering things that are not edible.
Or kosher.
Yeah, so they have to be things that you can.
And it's just the description of how to take it apart or whatever obviously varies by the size of the animal. The bird can have its whole thing put on there.
Well, it may also have to do with making sure that the blood is treated properly.
Yeah.
So we're essentially figuring out how to get the blood out, which we'll get to later. Okay.
When a person presents an offering of meal to the Lord, his offering shall be of choice flour. He shall pour oil upon it, lay frankincense on it, and present it to Aaron's sons, the priest. The priest shall scoop out of it a handful of its choice flour and oil, as well as all of its frankincense. This token portion he shall turn into smoke on the altar as an offering of fire, pleasing odor to the Eternal. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from the Eternal's offerings by fire. So this is part of how you feed the priest.
Yep. So you're getting the meal offering and all of this, the basic stuff, and start offering some of it and feeding the priest the rest of it.
How if they put the frankincense in the flour, how do they get the frankincense out of the flour and give it to the priest just what is lacking the frankincense? Because it says, and you'll scoop out the frankincense.
Maybe that it's big and obvious. I don't know. You strain it. I'm not entirely sure.
I'm thinking of some drops of something or other, which would of course be absorbed.
Let's see. And I don't see anything about that in my text. The interesting thing, choice flour.
It says Rashi says the frankincense is separate.
Yeah, the Hebrew solet is better translated semolina flour. Ibn Ezra translates flour of clear wheat. Rabbinic law stipulates that wherever the Torah mandates solet, that wheat must be used. The usual translation, fine flour, is therefore incorrect. It's not to say that flour for the minto is not finely ground or pounded in a mortar. It undoubtedly was. The point was really the kind of flour that. The point of the verse is to describe the substance of the offering and not how the substance was prepared. So you're not like making it into a fine flour. This is high quality flour.
And Rashi says that there are 5 kinds of meal offerings listed in this chapter, and all are baked before scooping but this one. Choice flour implies wheat flour. Exodus makes wheat specific.
Yep. Okay, and keep going with verse 4 here.
Verse
4. When you present.
Oh, okay. Turn the page. That's right. Okay. When you present an offering of meal baked in the oven, it shall be of choice flour, unleavened cakes with oil mixed in, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. This is the baking ones. If your offering is a meal offering on a griddle, it shall be of choice flour with oil mixed in, unleavened. Break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a meal offering. If your offering is a meal offering in a pan, it shall be made of choice flour and oil. When you present to the Lord a meal offering that is made in any of these ways, it shall be brought to the priest, who shall take it up to the altar. The priest shall remove the token portion from the meal offering and turn it into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from the Eternal's offerings by fire. So if you're going to make bread, of some sort, or matzah or pita, then also Aaron, the priesthood gets a share of it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how this worked, because it's clearly not the case that anybody who ever made bread doing this. It's the way for them to bring the offering to the temple, I think, in a way that it's not gonna, that it's easier to carry, maybe. So you're only bringing a little bit, and instead of having the flour, losing a big chunk of the flour, having it spill everywhere on the way, you turn it into bread and bring it, especially if you're burning it up anyway. And if you're making it to the priest, you need to you need to make it so that the priest can actually use it. So I would imagine that they got a lot of stale bread that took days to get there, and all sorts of other things. So I'm not sure exactly how they dealt with this.
But it's all unleavened bread. Each version is.
Yeah, these are all like tortillas, basically. They're really basic bread products that are thin and that have not risen. And they provide how you eat essentially how you eat the meat offerings, which we'll see in a second. No meal offering that you offer to Adonai shall be made with leaven. For no leaven or honey may be turned into smoke as an offering by fire to Adonai. You may bring to Adonai as an offering of choice products, but they shall not be offered on the altar for a pleasing odor. You shall season your every offering of meal with salt. You shall not omit from your meal offering the salt of your covenant with God. With all of your offerings, you must offer salt.
So what is the salt covenant with God?
Okay. So, according to priestly law, all sacrifices were to be salted. In the case of meat, salt functioned to remove whatever blood remained after slaughter. The unexpected use of salt in grain offerings is likely a reflection of the overall tendency toward uniformity of ritual. May also make it taste better. The same general requirement is referred to in Numbers 18:19. In Ezra 6:9 and 7:22, we read that large quantities of salt were delivered to the post-exilic temple of Jerusalem for use in the sacrificial cult. It could be just as a preservative. That's how you preserve stuff. You salted it, but.
Rashi and Maimonides are both saying that it's a product of the 6 days of creation. I sort of went to Lot's wife in my head when I was.
So an extensive literature has arisen on the subject, yeah, I don't understand what would be, where this necessarily comes from, unless it had some practical purpose at some point in time.
Probably need preservative but I also, as I say, I thought of Lot's wife being part of this.
So leaven is a cognate with the Akkadian emsu, or sour or fermented. In Akkadian, this adjective often describes beer, dough, and vinegar. Since antiquity, there's been discussion as to the meaning of the Hebrew davash, which is honey, which the way we translate as honey. From what is known, production of honey in beehives was not much in evidence in biblical Israel. Bees gathered to produce honey in the crevices of rocks and split tree trunks. and carcasses of animals. Accordingly,
Lion.
debauch often refers to the honey of bees. Most authorities, including Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and Maimonides, insist that debauch in the Bible refers primarily to the nectar of dates and possibly of other fruits. It is, after all, a general term for sweetness. The Akkadian cognate also had that usage. It's possible that the nectar of fruits referred to this way because honey processed by bees would hardly have been called first fruits. And it's reasonable to conclude that the prohibition set forth in our chapter was inclusive of both bee honey and nectars. It's also possible that it has the limitation here is that you want the flower, but you don't want to have anything that's been turned into alcohol or that could turn into alcohol. You don't want things that could ferment your grains sitting there fermenting while you're waiting to use them. And then suddenly you have a highly alcoholic batch of something. All it needs to do is get wet. If it's got the other stuff in it, you suddenly, I mean, it's got sugar in it. And if you're sitting there with sugar added to your mixture and lemon added to your beer mixture, and all of a sudden you've got a fermenting product that could be, turn your grains into fairly alcoholic stuff.
And then you're putting it on fire.
You're putting it on a fire, yeah. But if it's also to be consumed by the priest, and the priests are prohibited from getting drunk, then you have that issue too.
Well, it doesn't say you can't give it to the priest. It says it can't be part of the offering. So.
Yeah, but I think part of this is to give the priests what they're supposed to consume. So if you give them stuff that they can't consume for whatever reason, then that's a problem.
I don't know. I read it as you can give it to them, they can consume it. They just can't put it as part of the offering.
Maybe. I think there's a difference between holy food and regular food. So yeah. I'm not sure what we're dealing with. Okay. If you bring a meal offering of first fruits to Adonai, you shall bring new ears parched with fire, grits of the fresh grain as your meal offering of first fruits.
What are new ears?
I'm kind of wondering.
I assume not of corn.
Same items are mentioned in Leviticus 23. Here translated as grain in season. So it designates grain just prior to ripening when the kernel is not yet darkened, still have greenish color.
This says, Kimhi says, the word used here for new ears usually refers to the ear along with the stalk on which it grew. So there must be a term of ear besides corn or for grains.
It could just be that this is where we get the picture of the sheaf. This is bringing the whole sheaf. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You shall add oil to it and lay frankincense on it as a meal offering. The priest shall turn a portion of it into smoke. Some of the grits and oil with all of the frankincense is an offering by fire to Adonai. Okay. Chapter 3, Sally.
If his offering is a sacrifice of well-being, if he offers of the herd, whether male or a female, he shall bring before the Lord with one without blemish. He shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priest, shall dash the blood against the sides of the altar. He shall then present from the sacrifice of well-being as an offering by fire to the eternal, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is about the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is on the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. Aaron's sons shall turn these into smoke on the altar with the well-being offering, which is upon the wood that is on the fire as an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to the eternal. So that means most of the animal, large parts of the animal are not put on the fire, well-being sacrifice.
Yeah,
And then that's split between the priests and the sacrificer. And so
yeah,
that-
some goes to the person and some goes to the priest, yeah.
And if his offering for a sacrifice of well-being to the eternal is from the flock, whether a male or female, he shall offer one without blemish. If he presents a sheep as his offering, he shall bring it before the eternal and lay his hands upon the head of his offering. It shall be slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's sons shall dash its blood on against all sides of the altar. He shall then present as an offering by fire to the eternal the fat from the sacrifice of well-being, the whole broad tail, which shall be removed close to the backbone, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is upon the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is in the loins, and the protuberance of the liver, which he shall remove from the kidneys. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire to the eternal. Noticing it's mostly the fat, the kidneys, and a little bit of the liver. So the meat that really would be eaten is not sacrificed.
Yeah, it's the guts that they're burning up, essentially.
So that there's really a lot left for.
Yeah, for these offerings, there's a lot of them.
And if his offering is a goat, he shall bring it before the eternal and lay his hands upon its head. It shall be slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's sons shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. He shall then present as his offering from it as an offering by fire to the eternal, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is about the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is at the loins, the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove from the kidneys. The priest shall turn these into smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire of pleasing odor. All fat is the eternal's. It is the law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. You must not eat any fat or any blood.
And that way you avoid transmission of disease and coronary artery disease of all the fat you eat, right?
Yeah, except you get high blood pressure because to remove the blood, they put
You're adding all the
salt
salt in.
on it.
Of course, you're sweating a lot, so having the salt is not that bad.
But for all time, I mean, there's still some meat, koshering meat now, it still involves putting salt on it. So,
Yep. So, yeah, so fat, so blood was, some of the stuff actually ended up being collected as fertilizer and then they would sell the soil where all this stuff went outside the temple, to raise money for the temple and also to help raise crops. That's how it worked. So, they made use of all this stuff. It's just kind of through a cycle.
but blood, I mean, we've seen many times, blood is seen as the life force of a human, of a being.
Yeah.
And that's where you
Yeah,
can't have the blood, right?
yeah, we would think,
I mean, it seems to fit with the ritual and throughout the Torah, the understandings of blood.
and it could also be that the fat is avoided because the fat needs to be controlled when you burn it or you're gonna have a grease fire. So that's also possible. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of impacts of these things, but it's entirely possible that they have no, origin in the reasons for these decisions. That these decisions were made solely because of ritual purpose.
Right, but I mean, there is a lot of talking about blood being.
Yeah, blood, I think, and blood is probably is part of the issue. It may also have been connected to the fertility cult issues, which we don't really have. We have the impact of the fertility cult, but we don't have a description of the fertility cult. So we have to deal with it how we can.
Because
Okay,
even
yeah.
the Noahide law says not to use blood.
Yeah, so these are very ancient requirements. So we are in Leviticus 4 now. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus, when a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of Adonai's commandments about things not to be done, and does one of them." Okay, so these are negative commandments. Don't do this, and you do it anyway.
But it's,
That's what we're
but it's
talking about.
accidental.
But these are accidental.
They thought it was kosher fruit, it turns out it
I
wasn't
mean, well, we
kosher.
haven't gotten to that yet. If it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, so that blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull of the herd without blemish as a sin offering to Adonai. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai and lay his hand upon the head of the bull. The bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai, and the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it into the tent of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before Adonai in front of the curtain of the shrine. The priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of aromatic incense, which is in the tent of meeting before Adonai. And the rest of the bull's blood shall be poured out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He shall remove all the fat from the bowl of sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails, and all that stuff. Just as he removed from the ox and sacrifice of well-being, the priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar of well-being. The hide of the bull and all its flesh, as well as its head and legs, its entrails, and all the rest of the bull, he shall carry to a clean place outside the camp to the ash heap and burn it up in a wood fire. It shall be burned on the ash heap. Okay, now, you may be wondering, this is not a normal priest we're dealing with here, and it's often overlooked. This is, and the later rabbinic tradition says this is Kohen HaGadol, which is also not true. The rabbinic tradition, after the Hasmonean period, there was only one anointed priest. At that point, it was Kohen HaGadol. But in the first temple period, you had what was called a Kohen HaRosh, which was the head priest, and the other priests were all anointed. So, his sons, the sons of the high priest were anointed. So you had multiple generations of anointed priests that were able to go into the Holy of Holies and were ministering in the Holy of Holies. When you got to the Hasmonean period, when the Onayat priesthood leaves to go to Egypt in the 2nd century, that changes. The Hasmoneans only have one anointed priest, it's the Kohen HaGadol. So the rabbis are correct when they're talking about the latter part of the Second Temple period, but not when they're talking about the first part of the Second Temple period or the First Temple period. In both of those times, the sons of the high priest were anointed, and that meant that the uncles of the high priest were also anointed, and so were potentially some of the great uncles of the high priest anointed.
So we're talking about the males of the royal family.
Yes, so you're dealing with the males of the royal priestly family here. You're not dealing with one person. So when we're dealing with the text of Leviticus, there's actually a larger number of people who are available for this than we are when we get to the latter part of the existence of the temple in Jerusalem, when you're only dealing with one.
But I think it's interesting when it says, you know, that because the idea that if the anointed one does something, it hurts the entire community. That there's a higher responsibility, and this is a much more serious sacrifice than what an individual Israelite would have to do, that we'll see, but that it brings danger to the whole community when the let's say elite, the anointed priests, when the top folks mess up.
Well, and also, I mean, we'll see this in the next chapter, but there we encounter the issue of spreading false information, not telling correct information. Guilt is spread from person to person. So if the top people who are interacting with everything incur guilt, they're going to spread it down to everybody else. Okay. So we are already on chapter 4, verse 13.
If it is the whole community of Israel that has erred, the matter escapes the notice of the congregation, so that they do any of the things which by the Eternal's commandment ought not to be done, and they realize their guilt. When the sin for which they incurred guilt becomes known, the congregation shall offer a bull of the herd as a sin offering. And bring it before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community shall lay their hands upon the head of the bull before the Eternal, and the bull shall be slaughtered before the Eternal. The anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Eternal in front of the curtain. Some of the blood he shall put on the altar. Some of the blood he shall put on the horns of the altar, which is also interesting, a bull offering and the horns. This goes back to the bull cult.
Yep.
Of the altar, which is before the Eternal in the tent of meeting. And all the rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He shall remove all its fat from it and turn it into smoke on the altar. He shall do with this bull just as was done with the priest's bull of sin offering. He shall do the same with it. Thus the priest shall make expiation for them, and they shall be forgiven. He shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as an offering, as he burned the first bull. It is the sin offering of the congregation.
Okay, now, it's kind of an interesting question as to how does the whole community of Israel sin?
They missed when the new moon was, and therefore didn't observe a holiday on the proper day.
Right, there you go. So if you mess with the calendar, also, this is an issue. If you mess with the calendar, the whole community of Israel has sinned, which is what happens when you get to the Hasmonean period and they change the calendar. You run serious problems. The community of Israel continues to sin constantly because the calendar has now changed. It's no longer the same. And so that means that the temple is constantly corrupted from the time the Hasmoneans take over all the way until it's destroyed.
So this is the rabbinic view.
So this seems to be the view of the people who wrote the Qumran document MMT, who were arguing that there are all sorts of corruptions going on in the temple because they changed the calendar. When the Oneid priesthood, the people connected to it, who fled to Egypt and had their own temple, quite possibly kept the same calendar, quite likely kept the same calendar that they used before. They didn't adapt it. So you would have had a situation in which the temple in Egypt is operating on a different calendar, making offerings at different times than the temple in Jerusalem.
And when we're talking about the calendar, you're talking about the added month, right?
The whole calendar. I mean, if you celebrate, if you're supposed to.
But I mean, the change in the calendar was making the lunar calendar somewhat similar, acknowledge the solar calendar, right? To keep the holidays and the seasons. Or is that a
so
later
the original calendar would have been a solar calendar that had some holidays were in there, were seasonal holidays, but there were holidays that were solar calendar based. And the Hasmoneans came in and changed it to a lunar calendar. And then we have a later system that comes in that makes it a lunisolar calendar so that the holidays don't move. And if you're dealing with a holiday that is exacting about when things have to happen, you have the problem that you can't celebrate them on the wrong times. If you have a holiday that requires you do specific things at specific times, you need to do them at specific times. If the holiday is one in which you're not supposed to do things you would normally do because it's a holiday and you do them anyway, you're in trouble. And so if you if your days are off, you're doing things you're not supposed to be doing on certain holidays and not doing things you are supposed to be doing on other holidays, and you mess everything up. And that seems to be one of the biggest arguments going on when they change the calendar, is that now nothing is consistent. So you got to come to my calendar class to talk about the history of the calendar and this stuff. Okay.
But that would be the way the whole community, one way the whole community.
Yeah, calendar would definitely be a big one. Another one would be going back to the to the golden calf, and something along those lines.
But this is inadvertent and not intentional.
Yeah, well, I mean, it could be that you don't know that you sinned. Like if they were fighting a battle, for example, that they thought they should win and something bad happened. Or if you have a pestilence or plague that strikes the whole people, they will come to the idea that maybe somebody sinned, or maybe the people were sinning and they didn't know how they sinned, so to cover their bases, they then would do this, right? So if something really bad happens, you can assume, the people would assume in ancient times that they were being punished for something, and then maybe we need to take these precautions to apologize for whatever we did that we're not sure about.
We
Right?
should all make donations in the face of this.
So yeah, I mean, so this is, you know, you should do a cautionary fast, because maybe, you know, we should be fasting now. We should be, you know, we should be making donations to charity and doing good deeds to try to offset. I mean, that's the idea. That's the mindset you
Yeah.
run into. Okay.
22, verse 22.
Verse 20, we're in 4:22.
In case it is a chieftain who incurs guilt by doing unwittingly any of the things which by commandment of the Eternal his God had ought not to be done, and he realizes his guilt, or the sin of which he is guilty, is brought to his knowledge, he shall bring in as his offering a male goat without blemish. So the anointed priests have to bring a bull. The whole community brings a bull. The chieftain, who's a lower level person, he brings a goat. He shall lay his hands upon the goat's head, and it shall be slaughtered at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered before the Eternal. It is a sin offering. The priest shall take with his finger some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. And the rest of its blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering. All its fat he shall turn into smoke on the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of well-being. Thus the priest shall make expiation on behalf of his sin, and he shall be forgiven. So not the whole animal was sacrificed on this either. If a person from among the populace, that's the normal people, unwittingly incurs guilt by doing any of the things which by the Eternal's commandments ought not to be done, and he realizes his guilt, or the sin of which he is guilty is brought to his knowledge, he shall bring a female goat without blemish as his offering for the sin of which he is guilty. He shall lay his hands upon the head of the sin offering, and the sin offering shall be slaughtered at the place of the burnt offering. The priest shall take with his fingers some of the blood and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. And all the rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar. He shall remove its fat, just as fat is removed from the sacrifice of well-being. And the priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar for a pleasing odor to the Eternal. Thus the priest shall make expiation for him, and he shall be forgiven.
Now we get, if the offering he brings as a sin offering is a sheep, he shall bring a female without blemish. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and it shall be slaughtered as a sin offering at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. The priest shall take with his finger some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar. The rest of its blood he shall pour out the base of the altar, and all its fat he shall remove, just as the fat of the sheep of the sacrifice of well-being is removed. And the priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar over the Lord's offering by fire. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for the sin of which he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven. So these are actually full law. This is the whole law.
Although on some of the other things, it allows for poor people to make the offerings. You know, for the sin offering, it doesn't really. You have to actually be able to have a goat or a sheep.
Yeah. So this is a slight problem, right? Because if people don't have a goat or a sheep,
Right. They can't afford it.
Yeah. If a person incurs guilt, now we're chapter 5, and this is good stuff, so I want to get to this real quick here before we're done. When he has heard a public imprecation, and although able to testify as one who has either seen or learned of the matter, he does not give information, that he is subject to punishment. Or when a person, so think about this, if you have information that is important to share with everybody because of something going on, you're supposed to share it. You're not supposed to hide it.
But not gossip.
Yeah, I'm not talking about gossip. I mean, here we're actually talking about testimony about some guilt for somebody else, but it could also apply to information on anything that is a threat to the public interest, right? So This is making sure that you're testifying truth to people so that they can make the right decisions about different things. Or when a person touches anything, any unclean thing, be it the carcass of an unclean beast or the carcass of unclean cattle or the carcass of an unclean creeping thing, and the fact has escaped him, and then being unclean, he realizes his guilt. Or when he touches a human uncleanliness, as any such uncleanliness whereby one becomes unclean, and though he has known it, the fact has escaped him, but later he realizes his guilt. Or when a person utters an oath to bad or good purpose, or whatever a man may utter an oath, and though he has known it, the fact has escaped him, that later realizes his guilt in any of these matters. When he realizes his guilt in any of these matters, he shall confess that wherein he has sinned, and he shall bring as his penalty to the Lord, to Adonai, for the sin of which he is guilty, a female from the flock, sheep, or goat, as a sin offering, and the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for his sin. Now, it is important to understand here, and this I think we'll conclude with this before we get ready for services, is that when you touch these things that are ritually impure, it may not be something that occurs to you right away. It may not be something that anybody else could possibly know about because you can't see it, right? You can't see ritual impurity, but you can transmit that impurity from person to person. Which is interesting at this time when we're dealing with the possibility of things that we can't see being transmitted from person to person. Our tradition has long had this idea, granted, it was ritual impurity that we were talking about before, which is not the same as germs. But this stuff does apply, obviously, to germs as well. The idea is to be careful what you're interacting with. And once you realize you've interacted with something that you shouldn't have, you're supposed to atone. In our case, actually, we're supposed to wash our hands, right? That's the idea. If you've interacted with something that could be potentially unclean, like right now being pretty much out of your house and doing anything, you need to make sure that you're cleansing yourself. In ancient times here, they made an offering to cleanse themselves of ritual impurity.
But weren't they supposed to just, I mean, there was a ritual of what you're supposed to do if you're unclean.
Yeah.
So, and it's not the sacrifice. So essentially, I think what this is saying is they did the thing that made them unclean. They forgot about it and didn't do the ritual, which is like washing hands with the water.
And they transmitted it to somebody else.
They transmitted it.
Yeah.
So actually the washing hands and things, the waters of lustration was back in the ancient times too.
Yeah, so this is all about making sure that uncleanliness doesn't get transmitted from person to person, and being aware of what happens when it does. So we're now going to shift from Torah study to Saturday morning services, to Shabbat morning services, let's see here. I'm going to stop this and start it back up again.